Got it.
Got it. Hi, everyone. I'm Kent
Well,
Frazier here with my good friend Reggie and our friend Katherin. Hi, Katherin. Thanks for coming today. We're here actually in conversation about Reggie's latest book, Healing America's Narratives, The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow, Becoming More Fully Human. Noted on my hat, per se. So, Reggie, thank you so much for your really quality effort here. I know this has been a labor of love of yours for some years now, and I know the topics that you address in this book are not light in any way, shape, or form. And the amount of research you've done, the historical perspective you've offered, and the inevitability of some of the things you speak to here, along with the way forward, it's just really a super quality effort. So deep bow of respect to you, my friend. And thank you so much for this quality work. Would love to open the mic for you and just introduce yourself, how this book came to be, and what's most alive for you here this morning.
Yeah, so thank you, Kent, and
Mm-hmm.
Katherin, thank you for being with us. So just briefly, I'm an educator and a writer by birth, I think. I've spent my first 21 years out of college as a high school teacher and basketball coach and a college administrator. And I've been a teaching poet, now a professional coach, coaching individuals. Co-create a curriculum with Kent called Fully Human at Work. But primarily, educator, writer, and poet. And this book emerged through a combined sense of deep sadness and probably rage. I mean, it's definitely anger. I would say it was rage about the direction I saw aspects of the United States going in. And I say that aware that this isn't the only country that has issues, but it's the country in which I was born and lived. So it's the country I know most about. So that's why the book is focused on America. What I'd like to do is just give a quick overview of what the title means, and then speak to one or two of the key points of how the book unfolds, and then probably invite you, Katherin, into the conversation, since the book really implicates the readers. It implicates the writer of the book, but it implicates anybody who might read the book as well. So, Healing America's Narratives, the word healing, as it's used throughout the book, and this is not original with me. I probably first got a sense of this meaning of the word healing from Jon Kabat-Zinn, but it means coming to terms with things as they are. So again, not fixing or curing something necessarily, but really getting clear on what's true in the moment. What's real, what the Buddhists refer to as what is. So we want to get really clear on what are the competing narratives in America. So that's what the title of the book is talking about. Healing those, coming to terms with them, that they are real, and different people have different views. And if we make believe that those differences aren't there, or we just point to people we disagree with and say that they're wrong and we're right, we'll have problems like we have now. The subtitle, The Feminine, the Masculine, Our Collective National Shadow. I'll start with the end of that and work my way back to the beginning of it. Shadow is used in the book in the Jungian sense of shadow, that part of an individual or a group that the individual or group isn't aware of, doesn't know is there. In some areas, might have a hint that they know is there, but they just deny it and make believe they don't know. But more specifically, it's the part that's invisible to us, that we don't see it as part of who we are. So it's not the dark side of ourselves that we don't like. I wish I were more this or less that. We're not speaking about that when we speak about shadow. It's the part of myself that I don't know is there and that I tend to project onto others. So that's just, an overview of shadow. What I discovered as I was writing the book was that the collective shadow of this country historically emerges through an unhealthy iteration of masculine spirit or energy and a virtual absence of healthy feminine spirit or energy. And as those words are used, we're not speaking about men and women per se, but about those energies or spirits that are inherent in human beings, where the feminine tends more to relationship, mercy, compassion, embrace, and caring. And the masculine tends more towards wisdom, justice, individualism, and responsibility. And either of those can be healthy or unhealthy. So again, the shadow of this country, as it's described in the book, is dominated by an unhealthy iteration of the masculine and a virtual absence of a healthy feminine energy. So that's just the unpacking of the title and subtitle. And the tagline there, and becoming more fully human, what we mean by that is, in my view and in my experience, the healthiest human beings whom I've met in person or whom I know of publicly, who I've never met, tend to have a healthy integration of feminine and masculine energies, whether they're men or women, whether they're, I'm just going to limit, just get really quick here, whether they're gay or straight, whether they're trans or bi, and however they identify, they tend to have a balance of healthy feminine and healthy masculine. So again, those don't refer to gender specifically, but spirit or energy. The last thing I'll say before I stop talking and invite Kent you back in and Katherin you in, is one of the things that I do at the very beginning of the book is identify my own cultural givens. In other words, identify the worldview through which I wrote the book, both what I was given as a child and how it has evolved since I was given it as a child. So cultural givens are based on the geography, the chronology, the family, the religion or lack thereof, the community, and the early education of any human being, anywhere on the planet. So mine began in 1954 in Yonkers, New York. I was, post-World War II baby, 9 years after the war ended. My father was a Navy veteran, and he was a plumber. My mother was a first person in her family to go to college and graduate from college. She was a first generation Italian American, as my father was. I was second generation. And we were born into a, generally speaking, Catholic New York worldview. So in the world, when I was a child, the one true church was the Catholic Church. Everybody else, they could be good people, but they weren't, what God really thought was correct. God knew the Catholics were the one universal church. I was born to the best country in the world because we had a democracy and we won all our wars. At the time when I began reading and looking at television, it was clear that the Japanese and the Germans were bad people who were trying to redeem themselves after World War II, that Indians were savages, but there were some good Indians, cowboys were the good guys. And I could go on and on and on. But that was the view of the world I was given as a kid. We all get a view. If somebody was born in the same house I grew up with this year, even if they were Italian American and Catholic, their worldview, their cultural givens would be very different from ours, from the one that I had. So that's what we mean by cultural givens. And with no exceptions, all of us view the world through our cultural givens, unless and until we challenge what was given to us and begin the process of evolving a bit. So I'm going to pause there, and I see that we've just been joined, and I'm going to take a stab here. Is this Camillo Riva? Who just joined us? Are you there?
You're muted if you're saying something.
Yeah, you are muted if you're trying to talk, so you can unmute yourself. And we'll give you another couple of seconds, and if not, we'll trust that you're there, or maybe you just wanted to listen, and that's fine as well. I'm going to just go in and see if I can ask to unmute. But anyway, so that was an overview of the book's title, subtitle, and what we mean by cultural givens. Katherin, if you're up to it, and Camille, if you're there, you can tell me if I'm pronouncing your name correctly or not. Hey, Katherin, what I'd love to invite you, Katherin, to do, and Kent, you can play too, if you want to, let Katherin go first, or you can go before her. Speak a little bit about your own cultural givens, because I'm going to guess, looking at the three of us, that I probably was born first.
Not by much.
Okay, not by much. I appreciate that. But I'm just, Kevin, if you want, just for a couple of minutes, what was the worldview given to you, by the time you were 7 to 10 years old? Not any work you've done since then, but what was the world like as it was presented to you by family, teachers, community, television, and all of that when you were younger?
Who did you ask?
I asked Katherin, but either of you.
Oh, I'm
Gotcha.
sorry. Oh, I thought
Yeah,
you
yeah.
said, okay, I can go. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I was born and raised in Canada, so
Okay.
it's going to be a little different than yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my mom was Catholic. My dad was, he likes to say atheist or maybe agnostic, but basically Protestant.
Yeah.
My parents were separated when I was really, 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 really young. So basically I grew up with a single mom. Let's see. So things that I was aware of. Oh, and my parents immigrated from Hungary in '56 when the revolution was happening. So I was somewhat aware of that. Somewhere I learned, to really dislike Russians. And when you mentioned the cultural givens and shadow and stuff, I realized that that's still in me. I know that there's still a bias against Russians. I don't, I hear Russians speaking and I just like, ugh, that kind of attitude. And I have to work very hard with that because, my biases have to be set aside always. So, with what's going on in Ukraine, of course, that really impacted me because I was old enough to be aware of what went on in Czechoslovakia when the Russians came in. So it just all builds, but I'm going all over the place. Sorry. So, you mentioned like indigenous peoples. I never grew up with that thing about, cowboys and Indians. I mean, I'm not aware of even watching Westerns. I don't like John Wayne. He's a bigot. He's just horrible. And again, maybe this is stuff future learned, so I shouldn't even go into that because we're talking, up to 7 years old. But I experienced insecurities, but yet in our neighborhood, everybody knew everybody. So, and two of my best friends were also in a single mom household. So we'd go to each other's places after school. So there was another adult that you could go to. So there was that little bit of security, even though there was insecurity because I was a latchkey kid. So very, independent kind of a thing. And everybody was multicultural, Lithuanians, Estonians, Italians, Hungarians, we all blended. I went to Hungarian school. We had a Hungarian church. We had Hungarian scouts. So, get that influx of the culture. But yeah, so I don't know. I guess trying to think back, I think there's a lot of stuff that's blocked too during those years.
Yeah.
I don't, just because there was trauma. So, yeah, my dad was like the weekend dad, but I felt like he was there for me. Even so, school, I liked school because I always liked studying, I really enjoyed it. My grade 4 teacher was the worst though. Because most of us had skipped third grade. So we went from second to fourth, and she always called us accelerated rubbish. You know, and we're like, what the heck does that even mean? And she's the kind of
Mm.
person who'd whack you with a ruler. She went through a child's like desk over. I mean, it was like really bizarre. I remember that grade very well. I remember it very well. But anyway, so I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead, Reg.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So thanks. No, in fact, any one of us could probably speak for a couple of hours on everything we were given, and
Yeah.
that's, I'm not going to do that, and you didn't. But I really appreciated, first off, saying you were born in Canada, so that that's different from being
Yeah.
born here for a lot of reasons. I mean, there's some similarities. We have a lot of. Kent and
Yeah.
I studied coaching up in Ottawa for 2 years.
Oh,
And
okay.
and so at Integral Coaching Canada, so we have a lot of Canadian friends, but there is a big difference there. And just that you mentioned that your parents split when you were very, very young. I mean, right there. I mean, I was, my mother was very loud. She was a first grade teacher, very
Mhm.
4'9" Italian American.
Yeah.
But I always
And
had two
Italian
parents.
too.
Yeah. But I always had, both parents were always there. So right there is a big difference just in
Mhm.
in my experience, even though you said you felt your father's, still loved you, but every one of these little shifts, whether they're considered positive or negative, whether they're, ethnicity based or national based or just personal familial based, all of them impact our young views of the world. And that's what we're looking for here. So what you did was
Yeah.
exactly, what we asked you to do. And we just want to get a feel for that because underlying the arguments made in the book is, in fact, every one of us, there's not a human on the planet in any language, in any culture, born at any time, who didn't get given
Mhm.
a view of the world by the folks that they first came in contact with, which in a healthy situation is family of origin and then some teachers and extended family. So thank you for that, Katherin. Kent, do you want to jump in and
well, I
say a little
wanted
bit?
to check in with Camilo first and see,
Yeah.
Camilo, can you hear us?
Uh-oh.
No,
Yeah.
not yet.
Well,
Okay, no worries.
yeah,
All good.
they'll come in if they want. So
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to check. As I was listening to Katherin speak into her own experience growing up as in a single parent household, that's a sensitive area for me in my current context. I'm a co-parent. I have my kids 50% of the time. And so I always, my cultural given is that's bad and that's wrong to be divorced. My parents are still alive, thank God, and they're still married 50 plus years, 56 years. And so the cultural given of, you meet someone, you get married and you stay married, that I didn't follow, is a source of pain, psychological, emotional pain for me in my own holding of self, in the worries I have about what I'm giving my kids. That's very different than what I was given in some ways, and similar in some ways, but it's just I just found myself listening to your givens and right away feeling some shared connection around that particular human experience. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, sure. I can't imagine what it's like for you. I'm sorry.
Well, it's tough. No, it's
Yeah.
thank God I have friends like Reggie that help me understand how to hold myself. And, as he speaks to the definition of healing, I feel tears, right? It's like, come to terms with things as they are. Yeah. And that's hard for me sometimes. It's like, I wish it wasn't this way because it's supposed to be the other way. And that internal conversation isn't always pleasant. And so, you know, coming to terms with things as they are doesn't always happen overnight.
Nope.
And so, in a healing way, we get to learn about what it means to hibernate, or we get to learn what it means to ask for help, or we get to learn patience. We get to learn humility.
Yeah.
You know, some of the harder earned parts of one's character. So, yeah, these views that were given at an early age stay with us. You know, I'm almost 53 years old, so, you know, it's still influencing me. And unless and until I see it, I don't know. I'm not at choice in what's happening in my life. I'm simply exercising someone else's should or ought to. So that's what's coming up for me in the moment.
The shoulds and oughts are really hard.
Oh yeah.
I mean, we inflict them
That's
on
what all the
ourselves.
givens, totally.
Yeah, yeah. And then we continue to inflict those on ourselves. And that just increases our dissatisfaction and unhappiness and unease, because we don't know how to rewrite that for us.
Right.
You know, our own shoulds and oughts. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the premises, I love that. I don't know if you were planning on getting to this, Reggie, or not. So it's, do you want me to offer it now, or is there somewhere else you wanted to take the conversation?
Well, I don't know where you're going, so I can't answer that.
Oh, well, no, I forgot as I was asking permission. Let's see if it's still there. I lost it.
So the one thing I wanted to say is I appreciate that you came in as you did from your current situation as a dad who has his kids 50% of the time, rather than just telling us about what you were given, as I did and as Katherin did when you were younger. You zeroed in on the impact of one particular given today, and how it impacts you. So that's a great example of the power of these things if we don't investigate, explore, interrogate, and when appropriate, revise or delete them. So
Yeah.
that's, so we're not not saying that cultural givens are wrong. We're saying cultural givens are cultural givens from childhood, and if you're an adult now, you might want to take a look at them to see if they still hold up.
So does that fall into your shadow, like shadow work? Is that part of shadow work?
Yeah. So it can be. So yeah, great. Thank you for that question. So yes, a kind of standard example of shadow and shadow work is, for an individual, this is very generic, but I'm just going to use it because it speaks to your question. If in my family of origin, it wasn't okay to express anger, and in my case, that wasn't true because we were Italian. So we were, we'd yell at each other and then we'd eat, we'd be fine.
Hungarians too, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's definitely some shared traits among ethnicities, so for sure. But let's imagine a family where you can't express anger, and you're not allowed to. So as you grow up, you see yourself as not being angry because you were never allowed to be angry when you were a kid. And part of shadow is you repress certain things, in this case, anger, but you also then project it onto other people. And so you see anger everywhere else. So it's this combination of denial and projection. So anything that was given to me or to any one of us, whether it was something we're supposed to be or have, or something we're not allowed to be or have, that can be shadow. And we will begin to see it out there in the world but we will never see it in ourselves unless we do some shadow work. So that's the, that's kind of a real brief overview. So what I want to just speak to quickly, I'll just say this, and we don't need to follow it all the way down. In terms of the collective national shadow of the United States, which is the, in the subtitle of the book, I identified 9 elements that were pretty much there from the very beginning, 246 years ago. And even prior to that, before the country was a country, when the, primarily the British were settling it. But they're really uncomfortable to hear, but you can, when you hear them, you'll see their presence in 2022 United States culture. And again, this doesn't mean that every one of the 330 million Americans is characterized by these 9 traits, but enough of us are. And until we really navigate and work with these traits, they're gonna continue. So briefly, they are ignorance, arrogance, bigotry, fear, violence, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness. I can go through those again if you want to get them all. And they're actually on the website and on the Eventbrite page, but I'll say them one more time.
Okay.
No, I'll just say it's so they may not be in the same order, but I'll do my best. So ignorance, arrogance, bigotry, fear, violence, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness. So the argument in the book is, if we look at, and I trace 5 specific histories of the United States in the book, and I mentioned histories and just giving them a few paragraphs each. But these 5 histories get their own chapter. And you can find all 9 traits in each of these histories. So the first one is the history of women. And it speaks about the subjugation of women and the fear of the feminine. That's the language I use in the book. The next one is the history of Native Americans and how they were treated both by the pre-American Brits and in the post-1776 American federal government and state governments as well. History of African Americans. And then the last 2 make a kind of shift into the 20th and 21st centuries, the history of the Vietnam War, and then the history of post-9/11 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And you'll see these same traits wearing just different costumes. They don't look exactly the same in, whether it's, we want to point to 1964 for the Vietnam War, or 1972 for Vietnam, or 2001 for post-9/11, or go back to the 1860s for Native American and African American and women's history, because those were all, or they're all still in play. But the ignorance, arrogance, etc., remain just costumed in different ways. And I wish that weren't true, but the evidence is overwhelming. And then I'll say just 1 or 2 more examples of the briefer histories I just mentioned. The most important one of the briefer histories is ambivalence about the planet, because if we don't deal with that one, all the others are moot, because the humans will disappear, and it still might happen. And then I speak a little bit more about the culture of violence in some detail in the United States, the valuing of money and things more than people, the lack of health and caring. Another way to say that is the lack of a real healthcare system, a for-profit healthcare system. And so that's all of the evidence that I provide over the course of chapters, basically 3 through 10 of the shadow. So those middle chapters just are kind of the bad news part of the book. So I'm going to just pause there. Any questions coming up, tied back with cultural givens or anything else that's, there are no inappropriate questions here. So anything else coming up for either of you?
I just think that everything you've outlined is so spot on. It's all stuff that I've been feeling, thinking, but not as eloquently, I guess. So the way you've put this into words is really cool. You know, your specific histories is really quite interesting. You know, I intern at a domestic violence agency, advocacy, and we work with Black and African American women and children. So you know that's a huge, this history here is really huge, because everything that happened from the days of slavery still carries through. You know, whether it's traditions, cultural things, or the way African American population is still treated and regarded, it's still coming through. And you mentioned the Vietnam War, and I guess I was very aware of it. And as an adult, I've always felt like I was born into the wrong generation, because I feel like I should have been born into that generation for protest. You know, I feel like that generation had something tangible. I don't know, it sounds weird, but it's like they had something really tangible. And my generation, I feel like we didn't have something so much to really go out and protest. And the Vietnam War has always fascinated me, you know, going into the original history of why the US was even there, you know, for the training purposes and offering help and offering medical aid, and how that evolved into this. I'm not even going to call it conflict, it was war.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so I've got to get your book now, because I'm really fascinated. It seems like it's going to be a fascinating read.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And underlying all of that, and this goes back to there's a lot more nuance in the book, which I'm not going to get into because it's easy to go down a rabbit hole, but it comes down to, you know, the founders were brilliant, and they were products of their own cultural givens. They were products of the culture at the time. So when they said all men are created equal, they actually meant that quite literally, but not even, because they were only speaking about wealthy landowners. If you were a local blacksmith, you know, or a small farmer, even if you were, you know, considered white, you weren't included in the grand scheme. Obviously, African Americans were excluded, women were excluded, Native Americans were excluded. That's the underlying theme throughout the history of the United States, is a constant othering by Americans of those who either believe differently, behave differently, or are in some way not like, quote unquote, us. So that's why Vietnam was easy for us to do, because it was a primarily Buddhist country. It was a Southeast Asian country. They didn't look like us, they didn't speak like us. And, you know, we don't do that in Europe. we don't try to, you know, I mean, we wield a big stick, but it was much easier for, you know, the United States of America to do that in a Southeast Asian Buddhist country than it would have been to do in a Western European Christian nation. So that ongoing othering continues. And so one of the underlying tenets of the book, there are several, is the idea of development, you know, a developmental worldview. And there's a lot of research on adult development now, which I mentioned in some endnotes, but I use a shorthand for development in the book. And it just has 4 steps in it. And there, again, it's a shorthand. It's not as robust or nuanced as the actual researchers' findings have been, but it gets the job done. So the earliest stage of development is one that it's about me. It's, you know, it's me or egocentric. And that can be healthy or unhealthy. That's actually a really healthy, necessary move for toddlers to really differentiate themselves from their mothers or their mother figures and begin to individuate. If you don't do that, you don't have a healthy childhood, adolescence, or adulthood. So you have to make that move. So it's all about me. Graduation to a more inclusive, later developmental view is it's about us. And us can be my family of origin, it could be my religion, it could be my sports team, it can be my company I work for, it can be my nation, There are probably millions of us's. No, not probably. There are definitely millions of us's on the planet. And again, that can be healthy. If it's, oh, us, my family and the other families on my block, and we get along. There's a bunch of healthy us's there, as opposed to an unhealthy iteration of it where it's us against them. It's Democrats against Republicans. It's liberals against conservatives. It's capitalists against communists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the unhealthy iterations of an us or group-centric worldview, I believe, are at the core of, the essence of every major conflict and disaster in the world today, and have been for some centuries. That us-centric view. That's the second one. The third one is the growth into it's about all of us. And in this case, that's a human-centric view, meaning all human beings. Oh, we're the same species. And if we look at each other that way, it's harder to go to war because we have a different language or a different religious belief or a different whatever. We're the same species. We can get along that way. And then finally, it's about all that is. So in the smallest version of all that is, it's about the planet and everything on it. In a larger version, it's a relationship with, call it creation or the universe or whatever you want to call it. So those are the four shorthand versions of adult development that I use in the book. And virtually every one of those five histories I mentioned, women, Native Americans, African Americans, the Vietnam War and post 9/11 wars on terror, you can point directly to an us versus them. That's that second tier of development that I use as shorthand. And, it's men versus women. It's Europeans and Americans versus Native Americans, Europeans and Americans versus Africans first and African Americans, Americans versus the Vietnamese, and then Americans versus the Afghanistan people, the Taliban specifically, who were hiding the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks. And then preemptively, we just didn't like Saddam Hussein, so we attacked the Iraqi people because they had nothing to do with 9/11. So it's always an us versus them trajectory. So I'll stop there and just take a breath. Anything coming up for anybody there?
You mentioned the post 9/11 and Afghanistan, et cetera. And I'm thinking, the reasons that the US goes to war or invades other countries. And to me, it has always sounded, and I'm always disgusted by it, because it always sounds like, oh my God, it's human rights. Oh gosh, you guys are being, you're being stepped on. You can't express yourself, blah, 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 blah. So what was it, Kuwait? They had spoken up about human rights. They didn't go in there because Kuwait didn't have the oil to offer. So the US only goes into the countries that have something to give them, something that the US can take from that country. So it's not human rights. It's just being used as the guise to make the war sound more palatable. Because really, if everything that was going on in the US now, like the post-election stuff, et cetera, and even, while Trump was in office, if this had been happening in one of those countries with oil, the US would have been there in a like a snap of a finger. Sorry, this is my anger that comes through, and sometimes my prejudice is against the US. So I apologize for that.
Well, no, you don't. No need to apologize, Katherin, because you're pointing to something very real. I would get more nuanced. I think that any world leader whose country was attacked as the US was on 9/11 would have pursued the perpetrators, and they were originally in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But then we stayed for 20 years and fought a war that had no end in sight and no final purpose. So the attack on Iraq was completely preemptive. And unfortunately, the president at the time here, George W. Bush, was, he denies this, but he was at the effect of what are known as the neoconservatives, Paul Wolfowitz and Donald Rumsfeld, who had been trying to get rid of Saddam Hussein for over a decade. And they finally went in and did it. They used 9/11 as an excuse and weapons of mass destruction, which weren't there. So your anger is well placed. And a lot of Americans feel the same way. Not every American.
No,
but
I know.
A lot of us down here feel the same way, because that's my tax dollars going to a multi-trillion-dollar defense budget.
Right.
So, it's war for profit for a lot of corporations.
Well, it was because when they go in, like Cheney's companies and his cronies' companies, Bechtel, et cetera, they all went in there and reamed like big money under the guise of rebuild.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like, did you create this so that you could do this? It's just very frustrating.
So I appreciate that. And what I try to do when we have these conversations is that's a great example. And I want to bring it back to the context of the book, because that's just one of the examples of what we mean by collective national shadow in the US and the underlying elements of it. Again, ignorance, arrogance, violence, greed, et cetera. I'm not going to list all 9 of them again. And the work is to uncover those, point to them, own them, and integrate them towards becoming a wholer, a more integrated country and civilization. Because we just keep, stepping us away from, and I smile when I say this, but it's not at all funny, from the wars overseas. We kill each other. About 103 Americans die every day from gunshot wounds. Just under 2/3 of those are suicides, and about 22 of the suicides are American military combat veterans. So it's a really not a healthy culture that we have. Folks who either don't pay attention to all of that, or who aren't directly impacted by it, who are doing okay if they have a decent job and they have decent health care and a nice house somewhere. America works okay for them. But if you look at the larger picture of it, which is what I'm proselytizing for here, is it's not a, Kent introduced me to a great quote from, attributed to Krishnamurti. And Kent, I'll try to say it, and then you can correct anything I get wrong. So it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society, and to be well adjusted to a country where we have more guns than we have people. There's more than 1 gun per person in the United States, and we're the only democratic country on the planet that comes close to killing 100 people a day with guns. Nobody else. So, and then we make believe it's okay because the founders wrote the Second Amendment. So that's all shadow. That's all. And Kent and I like to speak about, we're using the phrase in recent weeks about even the people that we vote for, like the politicians that and there's some good people who are trying to do good work. And even the real journalists who report real news, they're all playing whack-a-mole. It's the issue of the day, and they try to talk about that, and they talk about that, and they keep on whacking moles. And they're whacking moles under the influence of the collective shadow of the United States. And until we really own that, a simple majority, or maybe just 11%, whatever the numbers are nowadays, owns that, recognizes it, and begins to integrate it, we'll continue playing whack-a-mole with the issue of the day. And that's why the book got written. So to stop the whack, I feel bad for the moles. I wanted to stop the whack-a-moles. Anything coming up for you, Mr. Frazier? So, and you can say no. I mean,
no, no, it's great. I appreciate the conversation every time. I love hearing the way you're refining your way of speaking to these issues. I love Katherin's participation in the conversation. It feels, like we're bringing the book alive in my daring to share like how cultural givens are affecting me now, right? So I'm really appreciating the conversation. I have some notes here. We can synthesize some more later, but a couple things maybe worth noting.
Yeah.
In all the shadow elements that are named in this are always going to exist. And so we're not suggesting a future that has none of those elements in them. We're suggesting that. So one of the things that was coming up for me is like, oh, what does ignorance get transformed into when brought out of the shadow? What does arrogance become transformed into when it comes out of the shadow? Right? So I could pretend for a period of time, and I have been arrogant in my life at times when I think I'm in a position of knowing something and I want to exercise my righteousness over someone that doesn't know. I can come across as arrogant. As I come to, and I was like celebrating my righteousness, right? That's arrogant. Or some reflection of arrogance. Am I getting close to the way you think about arrogance in the book? Like just thinking that you're the...
Well, yeah, and I'll just interject. You're spot on.
Please.
And I interject just by saying, typically, not always the case, but typically it's ignorance that breeds the arrogance. I don't know something, but I think I know everything. So I'm arrogant with my limited knowledge.
Puffing up. Yeah. Exactly. So what does that become? Right? Because I think we're not saying that's not going to exist.
Right.
There's times I know when I've been greedy. There's times I know when I've been excessive. There's times I know when I've been fearful and violent and untrustworthy, and I've been at the effect of all these things. And in a world and this is why Reggie and I named our company Paradox Edge a dozen years ago or so, is like these things co-arise, they coexist. They're complements, and to expect them to not be there is not a healthy expectation. And so I think what you're calling to is recognize that these are in all of us. And we are at the effect of all of this because of what we have and haven't been given. And unless and until we can actually notice our own unhealthy expression of these things and then be at choice in the matter and say, you know what, I'm feeling a little ignorant here, and I'm noticing I'm puffing up to try to feel safe or to try to be liked or to try to belong. And so I'm kind of coming across as arrogant, but it's really because I'm afraid.
Yeah.
That's what we're inviting people to become more able to do as you speak to the developmental context that we offer in this book. As I develop my ability to notice and name, acknowledge, accept, see these parts of me that I don't like and I project on everyone else in an othering exercise, I can stop committing violence to myself and others in this way by just owning, okay, I've got this. I can distinguish when I'm at the effect and under the influence of this, and I can make a different choice. I can be curious and ask a question rather than exert my righteousness. So those are some of the things that were coming up for me. The other thing that was coming up for me was, Katherin, as you were speaking into, I guess you both were, as you were speaking into the Vietnam War, and Reggie, you spoke to this around the role that television, and those that controlled the national story, whether it's print or television, right? When the printing press came about and when the television and radio came about, the stories we were given at the scale of the collective, like what we were, it's, who's controlling the story that I'm being asked to subscribe to, whether it's weapons of mass destruction that aren't there, or whatever the case might be. We were fed tons of that story.
Yeah.
So how are we checking for truthfulness, right? And this is one of the challenges we speak to, in some regards, what's the integrity of the information ecology that we're, part of? And how do we discern truth, signal from noise?
And I love that you brought that in, Kent, because, two specific historical moments occurred when the media, and this is before social media. So when the media was limited, so you had to really either trust it or not trust it, but there were more real journalists out there, not as many crazy people with political ideologies to try to support. But twice in American history, and probably more than twice, but twice that I can remember and that really stand out, when video from photojournalists and whatever you would call them, just journalists on the ground in Vietnam, started making its way to the 6 o'clock news in the United States in the 1960s. Lyndon Johnson's and Congress's, but especially the president's life got much more difficult because Americans didn't want to be seeing young men, and mostly young men at the time, not too many women, in body bags, and they were seeing that. Interestingly, so that was journalism was a really good anti-war tool at that moment. We don't want this war.
Kind of speaking to the protest that Katherin was saying, God, I wish I was alive then where I could be involved in that cause, right, Katherin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really feel like I missed out on something. I know this sounds weird, but that whole culture of that era is vibrant. It had so much meaning.
Yeah.
Well, this is part of what I think that Reggie's book, I don't mean to speak for you, it's kind of how I'm taking this beautiful tool that he created and putting it in my bag. Like, okay, how do I want to exercise my perspective on, these perspectives? All of that, that aliveness that you're speaking to of that era, perhaps Reggie, you'll know better than I, perhaps that's the initial, like, that opening of the green meme, in that counterculture movement, that particular worldview gets born because of these images and because of these things that we're becoming aware of in our consciousness. And so the energy of a new level of development, a new perspective arising, has a lot of sexiness and buzz to it. And the apathy that we all feel in the wake of all this stuff that you spoke to earlier, it's the deadening, like the buzz when that initially came online in this counterculture movement. Now 50 years plus 60 years, that signal's still there. It's just one of the many moles. And therefore, the collective apathy the deadening of our response to all these issues.
Yes.
We're trying to use this. I'll speak in verse. I'm trying to use this book that Reggie's put together as an instrument to help reignite.
Okay.
Let's be less apathetic. Pick something and devote your life to it. And so how do we put this in practice? The question, how, Katherin, is your participation in this conversation? Is your understanding these perspectives in this way? How's this going to help you be a more effective leader and person in the circles that you run in?
That's a good question, because I agree with everything you've said. I post things on Facebook. Like I'll share things from the news. I mean, I always research before I post because there is a lot of false information. So, but I'll share issues that are going on, like the gun violence in schools. A friend of mine in Texas, her daughter's school recently went under lockdown, and it's like, where's the outrage? And I find out that nobody responds. There's like no comments, all the posts are cute kittens and things like that, which I'll do too. But I am so frustrated with the apathy of everybody around me. And it's like, you just want to grab him, shake him. It's like, don't you freaking care? Don't you care about what's going on? Don't you care about the planet? Don't you care about anything? And I feel like people don't, because like you said, Reggie, there's that complacency, everything's working for me. Status quo is cool. I can't afford, or I don't have the energy to be involved in anything else, to care about anything else. I just want to worry about me. And if it works for me, then okay, I go along. And I honestly don't know how to raise this, I love your energy, Kent, because I feel it too. I just don't know how.
Yeah.
I get frustrated.
Well, we don't know how we, yeah, go ahead, Reggie.
Yeah, it's real. It's I think the reason we don't really know how is there are probably some wrong ways to do it. There are probably many right ways to do it, and it's extraordinarily complex. I think a lot of the complacency and what appears as apathy, and sometimes is apathy, I think occurs because there's just so much. It's overwhelming for people.
Yeah.
And but it is that well, my group is okay, my little community is okay, or my church or my school, my neighborhood seems okay. I'm sitting 20 minutes from Newtown, Connecticut. And up until the anniversary is coming up. In fact, the 10th anniversary. Yeah. December 14th, 2012. Up until then, Newtown was predominantly white, safe, relatively upper middle class town, good place. I did some work in their high school. That changed. And they've taken great steps to not just be identified by that one day there, but that was an example. The idea of gun violence in Newtown, Connecticut in 2012, nobody was thinking about that. I shouldn't say nobody was, but it wasn't the primary focus.
Right.
Now we have active shooter drills in every school in the country as a requirement. So I wanted to
my kids come home and talk about that. And I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
What does that do to you as a parent to hear your kids talk about that? That's horrific.
It is horrific.
And what does it do to, the running joke when I was in grade school was we used to do nuclear war. Yeah. So in hindsight, once you got to be about fourth grade or so, you kind of knew, once you learned about what you saw some photographs or video from nuclear, tests and a lot, you kind of knew ducking under your desk wasn't going to help you if the Russians dropped a bomb on your town in the United States. But the active shooter drills now are very real. What does that do to a kid's psyche early on? That's part of the school day, or week or whatever it is. But I want to go back to the second example of the media, because I think it's really important to say this. And it feels a little bit like a non sequitur, but I don't want to lose it. I mentioned the Vietnam video footage coming back, but actually preceding that in 1960, early 62, 63, 64, leading up to 64, was when the video of law enforcement and even some firefighters in the South using dogs and fire hoses to push back protesters, many of whom were children. And if you haven't ever seen that, what a fire hose can do to a human body is, it doesn't kill you like a bullet does, but it's really damaging. When that appeared on the news, and even when the coming across the bridge, and when John Lewis was beaten, and that particular march to Montgomery, that ended up on the news. Americans in the North and West, and a lot of white Americans saw that, and they shifted. Some, it seems, not permanently or not enough, but they saw that was wrong. And so that coverage of those protests and local law enforcement's response to the protests by pretty brave journalists, because they weren't particularly welcome, in those towns and cities in the South either, were really important. So it's this, kind of juxtaposition of so much information now and how much of it is trustworthy, but the power of what real journalism can do. Both of those are true. And it's kind of living with that paradox of sifting through the junk. And there's a lot of it. There's misinformation that's just carelessly reported or shared, and there's disinformation that's intentionally put out there to try to corrupt, the information ecology. So it's a mess. And behind all of it, with virtually no exceptions, there's somebody making money.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so our goal, and Kent, you really articulated this clearly, is we're not, maybe someday, not in my lifetime, violence, greed, ignorance, arrogance disappear, but knowing what I know about human beings, probably not going to disappear, because we all kind of begin as infants and we're taught different things. But to take it out of the closet. Oh, here, we're not saying that America is an ignorant, arrogant, greedy, bigoted, fear-based, violent country. We're saying America has behaved in and frequently behaves in ignorant, arrogant, bigoted, fearful, violent, greedy, excessive, untrustworthy ways. And until we own that part of our collective selves, we will continue to act that way. That's the underlying message. It's not an indictment of this country. It's a pointing to its shadow. In fact, I just want to, the woman that wrote the foreword to the book, whom I've never met in person, I was on a racial equality panel with her. I think it was during the pandemic. I forget exactly now, but it was a program for the National Association for Poetry Therapy. And her name is Maureen Walker, and she's based out of Boston. But I asked her if she would read the manuscript and write a testimonial. She wrote this beautiful testimonial that we ended up using as a foreword for the book. And I just want to read a blurb, an excerpt of it that appears on the front cover. She referred to the book as an aching love story to an America capable of healing through an evolving imagination of human meaning and possibility. And again, that language is from Maureen Walker, and she's the author of When Getting Along Is Not Enough, Reconstructing Race in Our Lives and Relationships. So I've never met her in person. I've met her, in person online, but I've never been standing in the same floor or chunk of earth as she has been. But that's what it really is. When I read that, an aching love story for an America capable of healing and evolving, she just zeroed in on it. I was happy with that testimonial as well with the book itself, because it just felt so true. And as all of us humans would like, I felt seen and heard by her. And she was just this wonderfully generous human being who plowed through that manuscript as a PDF before it was fully edited and ready to go. So deep bow to Maureen, if you ever see this. Thank you. Yeah. So I don't want to keep, I could speak about specific things in the book, for a long, long time. And I don't want to keep doing that. Anything else coming up? Well, I do have one suggestion how we might begin to bring this to a close, but I want to hear if anything's coming up. Maureen, Katherin. I'm still thinking of Maureen Walker. For you, and I have your name right in front of me.
I know. No, I'm taking a lot of notes, processing a lot. This is really good. It's increasing my awareness of things. So this is very good. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You're actually making it very easy for me, and I'm going to say for Ken probably as well, because you're not, sometimes people want to push back on some of the arguments and things. So you're just welcoming us and sharing your own perspective. So I appreciate that. Although I do appreciate pushback and healthy civil argument as well.
Yeah.
So what I was thinking of in chapter 11 of the book, and I can just say these out loud. I introduce, and chapter 11 is entitled, So Now What? After I depressed the reader through the first 10 chapters. So now what? Basically, so what? What do we do now? And there's a lot in chapter 11, but underlying the trajectory of the chapter are 6 questions and statements. There's a total of 6 sentences. 4 are questions and 2 are statements. I'm just going to say them out loud. I may have to look at the book if I forget one. in no particular order. The first question is definitely, who am I really? That's for the readers to consider that. And it's looked at through both a body, mind, a soul, and a spirit perspective. Ken, you have them there in the right order, right?
Everything is a story.
Yeah, so everything is a story is the second one, and that's a statement. And the running joke that I use, if I'm in a classroom or if I'm speaking to a group of people, I like to say that if you don't think that everything is a story, that's fine, but it's just your story about the fact that everything is a story, because everything is a story. I mean, we can tell whatever stories we want. I mean, even science, real science, that's one story about the world, and it's an important story. And when it's true science with real evidence and research, it's really important. It's, we wouldn't be having this conversation online without real science, because there wouldn't be computers and video and all that. But everything is a story. So what stories do you want to be telling in your life, and how do you want to tell them? Kent?
What's my impact and what impacts me?
Yeah. So just those two questions combined together, what's the wake I'm leaving in my life, positive or negative? And what, in this, Kent, I love your language, it's what am I at the effect of? So what's impacting me on a day-to-day basis, culturally, personally? You get up with a bad headache, that you can be at the effect of that headache the whole day, and otherwise being a wonderful human being, but just a little bit shorter with people and less patient. So, what am I at the impact of? Really important to pay attention to that.
What am I not seeing?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the question that introduces shadow. That, I think, is one of the best practices anybody can practice as a human being. All right.
Especially when we're agitated, right? Especially when we've got this heightened response to something that is or isn't happening. Yeah. Okay, like, what's my story that I'm telling myself? What am I at the effect of? And what am I not seeing such that I'm so lathered up?
Yeah. Well, and so thank you for saying it that way, because that's effectively what we do in the book is we show the relationships among these four questions and two statements. Because the story I tell might come out a certain way because of what I'm being impacted by, and definitely is impacted by what I'm not seeing. So there's these cyclical relationships there. The questions aren't random. So
right, exactly. Who are my people?
Yeah. So who are my people is a really interesting one, because
and who are the others?
Oh yeah.
Sorry.
Well, no, but that's exactly it. So
I know.
How do I answer that question? And are my people limited to people who have the same skin pigmentation or accent or religious beliefs or income or blah, 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 whatever it happens to be? Or do I actually live in a space based on who I think I am? That first question, who am I really? Where any human being is my people. And to extrapolate even further, and play with the word people a little bit, and do I do as some of the Buddhist monks used to do, maybe they still do, when they would build their huts and their small buildings, either get down on their hands and knees and remove all of the earthworms so they wouldn't get killed while they were building the huts. So they're, talk about a respect for life. I don't think that happens when we put in a new skyscraper or corporate headquarters anywhere. It's every worm for itself in those moments.
Yeah. And your last statement here, I am going to die.
Yeah. So, I'm going to die. Yep. In awareness of what is that awareness? What is that reality that given enough time, here's a negative version of it. No one hasn't died. Here's the positive way to say it. Given enough time, everyone dies. So what impact, there's the word impact again, does that reality, that truth have on how I live my life? And it can affect people really differently. And actually there is one more question that it's hidden, I think, on the top of the next page in the book.
Let me look. I don't see it if it's there.
Okay, so well, the final question really is how am I in relationship with
Oh, there.
these,
Yeah. How
the
do I relate?
previous, the previous 5 questions and statements, and with the rest of my life. So the am I in relationship with whatever, the headache I wake up with, the end of my marriage, the fact that I have to get my hips replaced, my kid getting in trouble with the local police, whatever it is, or or the great celebration on my birthday where my friends and family, surprised me. All of the positives and negative things, and either though it's going to be a judgment. How am I in relationship with what happens? Because I can't really control all of the what happens in my life. I might be able to influence some of it, but mostly it's out of my control. And the question becomes, how am I in a relationship with it? And
There's go ahead. As you're saying this, it brings forward another Krishnamurti teaching when he revealed his secret to happiness.
Okay.
I don't mind what happens. Or another way to say that might be, I'm not at the effect of what's happening. It's just what's happening. My way of relating to it is I'm choosing to relate to it as it's just what's happening.
How about, hey, I'm coming to terms with things as they are.
Or I'm coming to terms with things as they are. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really healing, beautiful, salutogenic, to introduce that word, perspective.
Yeah. I don't mind what's happening. And
my secret to happiness, I don't mind what's happening.
And that's, we say that out loud, we say, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. Try
to
that.
Live from that, right?
Oh man, try that when everything is falling apart, or it feels like it's falling apart. Oh, I don't mind that everything is falling apart. And probably,
or even little stuff like I can't find the link to this Zoom call, and I start noticing it's like, oh my gosh.
Yes. I was starting to get like that, trying to find the link for this.
Totally.
So and then even that goes back to, as we say this now, in just connecting all of these dots, going back to Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning. And everything can be taken from someone except the last of the human freedoms, the freedom to choose one's attitude or disposition in any given set of circumstances. He used more words than Krishnamurti did. Yeah. And that was his absolute right. And I don't blame him, but they were saying very, very similar, if not identical things.
And the Frankl quote that comes to me in that context is, between stimulus and response, between what's happening, stimulus, and response, my way of relating to what's happening, in that space lies all of our freedom and lies all of our growth.
Yeah. So
and
why do we
talk
suffer
so much about slowing down, right? And just like, okay, stimulus, response, stimulus, that's all, like action, react, right? And to what extent do we have choice in this? Are we aware that I've got these shadow elements and I'm not projecting all my stuff onto someone else? That's my reaction to some stimulus. Can I see that reaction and then choose? Oh, okay, I don't want to be violent here, or I don't want to be greedy here.
And then if we understand that, and this is where the fully human piece really comes in for me, all of it that we've been talking about is part of the fully human piece. But if we really understand that, I have this choice point between stimulus and response. I get to choose my attitude or my response here. If I know that, and in a given moment when I'm really, really agitated and everything feels off, and I have somebody in my family or somebody I know really well I can blame, it's even better because it's not my fault. But I know that I don't want to make it worse, and I still do. With all that I know and all that I believe in and my commitment to being a good person, and I still make the unskillful move, let's just call it that. So not a final piece, but one piece we haven't spoken about. In that moment, what we need is self-compassion.
Totally.
Yeah, to be able to say, okay, I know what I just did. I know better. I wish I hadn't done that. And not in any way to let myself off the hook, but rather than taking out the self-flagellating tool and hitting myself with the cat of nine tails so I have scars on my back, can I just take a moment and say, oh, that was an unskillful moment. I'm suffering now because of it. I'm a human being. Human beings suffer. Can I be kind and compassionate to myself in this moment? And I have to credit Kristen Neff with, that was just basically a paraphrase of some of her work on self-compassion. But that's that move we need to make, because I'm never going to be perfect. Kent, you're pretty close to it, so I know.
Oh God. No,
I love it.
he's
That was a-
being facetious.
we know each other really well, so we knew that was a joke. Maybe
Maybe
Katherin.
we're perfectly imperfect, right?
That's
Good.
it.
There you go. So, we're about, 10 minutes, from the bottom of the hour, we want to bring this to a close. So I just want to be aware that, I've been talking a lot in the last hour and a half, but the last few minutes especially. Katherin, anything else coming up for you, or questions or anything at all that you want to speak to? And if there isn't anything, no is fine as well, but I want to make sure.
What is your website?
So we'll give you several.
Okay.
Site is healingamericasnarratives.com. So it's just the name of the book.com. We could probably capture them and put them in the chat box.
Oh, okay.
We have a fullyhuman.us website.
Wow.
That's in work in progress.
Okay, so
okay.
fullyhuman@work.com.
Yeah, that's still mostly the primary.
Okay.
And then if you really want to, make your life difficult, Kent and I each have our own personal websites.
Oh, okay.
That have been in existence before we were working together.
Oh, thank you. There we go.
So it's reggiemarra.com or kentfrazier.com.
Okay, thank you.
But and then the easiest thing, if you Google Healing America's Narratives or Fully Human,
Right. It'll
all that
stuff will
comes up.
pop up. Okay.
Yeah. So,
Okay, thank you.
but,
Fully human. Okay.
and thank you, Kent. Kent's putting.
Yeah,
all the-
thanks very much. I appreciate that. Okay.
Oh, it took my H away. It's kenthfrazier.com. It took the H out of my name. It's,
Oh,
it did it
okay.
again. It's like it's doing an automatic spell check or something here. KentHFrazier.com is the correct
Oh, I
one.
see. Oh,
Yeah.
Kent H.
Yeah, it looks like
Yeah.
Kent Frazier. Kent.
Yeah.
Oh,
My
Kent
middle
Frazier.
name. My middle name is Helm, and the
Oh.
H stands for Helm.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
As I try to
Captains-
helm my own ship.
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
But that, really, truly, that's I've played with that idea, that naming. I used to be ashamed of that middle name because it wasn't normal,
Yeah.
and so I would hide it. And as I've come to terms with this is my naming, okay, well, how can I own it and integrate it? Rather than tell a story that I don't have a middle name, or I hate my middle name, or my middle name's stupid, or how can I make meaning out of it such that I actually feel good?
Yeah.
And I can use it as a compass of sorts.
Mhm.
And that's how I've done it. It's like, okay, this is my responsibility to helm my own ship. It's my responsibility to choose how I want to respond between stimulus and how I'm seeing it, how I'm thinking about it, how I'm talking about it, the action I want to take with it.
Yeah.
That's my responsibility. That's my helmsmanship.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautifully said.
Mhm.
So I just want to take a moment, Kent, as always, thank you for joining me on this adventure and for
Thank you, bud.
hosting and just always bringing nuance and insights into some things that we're already familiar with, and just hearing them in a different way and introducing that to the conversation, which you always do. So I'm really grateful for that. And I'm not just saying that, I think that I don't give out compliments unnecessarily.
He's a tough teacher. He was a tough Catholic school teacher, man.
And then Katherin, there's a humorous side to what I'm going to say to you, but I'll say the serious side first. Thank you for, seeing that it might just be the three of us and for not dropping out of the call. Because what we do, so, sometimes, we've had, as many as about 12 or 13 people on these. And what we do when people sign up, what I do, because it's, I take care of the Eventbrite stuff. I always check, because it's 2022 in America or on planet Earth. I always check to see if there are any real people behind the names. So so I look on LinkedIn and Facebook, see if anybody has it. So you seemed real, because I could find like something about you. I think it was on LinkedIn I found you.
I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, probably in a big snowsuit up in Umiat.
I said, okay, so she's real. And then there were, I think, just 3 other names. And I actually said to Kent earlier today, I said, this Katherin seems real. But there was one name I couldn't find any evidence of it.
Oh my
this person
gosh.
existing. And then, Camillo or Camillo, I don't know if evidently was real, but chose not to stand, because a lot of people want to they're hoping for like 50 people on a Zoom call so they can just hide and learn. And I understand that perspective. I've done that in the past myself. But thank you for staying on, and then for really engaging openly and both deepening and broadening the conversation with us. I really appreciate your input and just staying with us, because Kent and I, we like to play, but we probably would have done something else with our afternoons had nobody joined us. So.
Oh no.
Yeah. I also, if I could just speak briefly, Katherin, I just want to acknowledge the work you do in the world.
Oh, thank you.
It takes a big heart to work with people that have been battered. I think if I heard you say that accurately.
That's my internship, my ultimate goal when I graduate and could get a license. I want to work with children and adolescents who are experiencing grief and trauma.
Okay.
Talk about alleviating unnecessary suffering. So I just really want to acknowledge you and your choice to put your one precious life in that way of service. So thank you so much.
Well, it's a big change. I've worked my whole life as an environmental engineer, and I had to leave a very toxic workplace that took a severe toll on me. And then I said, you know what? I'm changing. I'm going a completely new direction.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's all really good. It's my calling, like having conversations like this. I love these. I appreciate these, and I've missed them. So this is really good. So thank you for offering this.
Oh, you're so welcome. And just to play my role as I do in our holding of things, as I hear people speak into making choices around different vocations, one of the things that Reggie and I bring forward in our Fully Human at Work program, if you like this kind of thing, we have a program starting in January 13th where we're going to have a cohort of people spending 12 weeks together in 6 2-hour sessions, exploring the cultural givens, exploring who do I think I have to be in my job such that I stay in a toxic work environment for so long. And then how do I arrive at some sense of like, oh, I actually have choice. I can leave and I can actually bring my soul forward.
Yes.
In a different expression than what I was doing to kind of survive and make my way through my life. So if you like this kind of conversation, if you check out the fullyhumanatwork.com website, you'll see we have a program that's starting in January and people are starting to register for that. We cap it at 18 people. So you don't have to be afraid if there's going to be a ton of people, because we want to invite this kind of intimate conversation in both small group work, triads, like the 3 of us just did today, as well as like, how do we then share among, 15 to 18 people, the nuance in our different givens and the similarities in our shared givens as human beings, and how that just gets maybe translated through different families and cultures of origin. So if you like this, I just wanted to draw your attention to that.
Okay, thank you. I'll definitely go and check it out after this, so I don't forget today.
Yeah, totally. Cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This has really been a high quality conversation. Thank you for helping it be such.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to bring the recording to a close, and we can, say any last words we want once that's done. So thank you again, Katherin. Kent, as always, thank you. And
Mhm.
we'll be doing this again sometime next month.
Yes.
Peace.
Thanks, Reggie. Great job. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Katherin.
Peace out.